Since October 7th, we've seen a number of different tropes, different code words, different key phrases that have been employed by Zionists and pro-Israeli supporters, effectively to frame the debate about this current conflict and to neutralize any type of sympathy for the Palestinians, but to make Israel to seem the more sympathetic and the courageous party in this actual conflict. So what we're going to talk about today is what are the different keywords, what are the different tropes, what are the different talking points that Zionists and pro-Israeli supporters have been using to be able to garner support. The first one started from Piers Morgan, but it's become nomenclature for a lot of different Israel supporters, and it's the phrase, do you condemn Hamas? Why is this important? Well, it's important because it effectively makes it an equation of delegitimizing one side, while just in the absence of the Israeli government and the crimes that they commit, making it seem that they are a legitimate party. So the question of do you condemn Hamas, not Hamas activities, but Hamas as an organization, puts you in the position where you're forced to accept, in a sense, Israel's actions as an extension of the legitimacy of their government. Another Zionist trope: Israel is the most moral army in the world. Now, for those who are critics of Israel, this can be excessively hyperbolic to the point where it's almost a laughable phrase. But what isn't appreciated is the extent to which actually supporters of Israel believe in this statement. In fact, you even had representatives of the U.S. government put their army under the bus and then promote Israel's actions in Gaza as a textbook example of morality and discretion of force. Disabusing or neutralizing this statement isn't that hard. The question is, what is morality? And I think words speak more than actions. In the early days after October 7th, we saw a tendency to sensationalize and in many cases exaggerate certain atrocities that are committed on that day. The most famous of this, of course, is the 40 beheaded babies. Just that imagery is enough to shock the consciousness. Of course, it turned out to be completely fake, but by that point, it had been used so prominently by many different figures, even at one point by Joe Biden himself apparently believing it, that it became an easy tool to radicalize people towards support for Israel's operation in Gaza. A common talking point by Zionists and pro-Israel supporters is that Hamas uses human shields. And what is revealing about this is that any allegation by Zionists and pro-Israel supporters is typically also an admission of complicity. Why? Because Israel in the past conflicts has been known to use Palestinians as human shields. And without actually any press allowed into Gaza, this accusation can be an easy way for indiscriminate bombing of civilians to happen under the guise that one or two Hamas fighters were located in a certain area. Zionists like to say if Palestinians laid down their weapons, there would be peace, but if Israel had to lay down their weapons, they would be eviscerated. Why this is so laughable is because we aren't assuming a scenario where Palestinians have ultimate power. And of course, there's a certain element of racism and Islamophobia by assuming that Palestinians are all genocidal maniacs willing to end Israel and its entire existence, whereas the reality is Palestine is the one that's not existing, and Palestine is the one that's having a genocide inflicted upon it. 1 year into this conflict, we started seeing in major media outlets the word genocide being used as an allegation against what Israel's doing in Gaza. And one of the first ways for pro-Israel supporters to try and counter this was to say it's a blood libel. You're trying to, in a very anti-Semitic fashion, cast Jews in a negative light as being able to commit the most horrendous of crimes and cast aspersions to past stereotypes of Jews being lecherous and also having a sort of sadistic mindset, whereas the reality is genocide is just a factual statement of the nature of the atrocities that are committed in a systematic fashion with the intent to destroy, in part and whole, the Gazans that are there, and it has been attributed by a number of human rights organizations, not the most anti-Semitic factions of society. Israel and Israel supporters like to drum up certain elements of Islamophobia and anti-migrant sentiment and racism to use as a way to counteract the growing tide of pro-Palestinian support. And one way they do that is to say that we are fighting the savages there, the Islamists there in Gaza, so they don't come to your shores. I mean, the statement is laughable in many ways, but the problem is that Israel also pretends to be a model democracy and a multi-ethnic, democracy that is able to connect to all of the metropolitan elements of Western society, yet at the same time is using these most basic tropes and to play into the sentiments of the most debased parts of Western society to be able to garner support and generate fear against Palestinians and Palestinian supporters. Israel likes to say that you can't trust any of the numbers coming from the Hamas Ministry of Health. I think, on a factual matter, we need to point out that in previous conflicts, whether it's in 2021 or 2014, the numbers from the Hamas quote-unquote Ministry of Health, or basically Gaza Ministry of Health, have more or less aligned with the United Nations numbers and the numbers given by the IDF as well. We should also point out that those numbers are not just numbers that come out of thin air, but that they're attributed by name to people who have actually died. And that in all reality, they're likely an underestimate because God knows how many people are buried underneath all of these buildings that have been demolished. One of the ways to counteract the label of genocide against Israel is to suggest that because you have many, many Palestinians and many, many Gazans still in Gaza, therefore there is no genocide that has actually been committed. Genocide is not really just a numbers game. Genocide is a systematic act, and it is different from the idea of a Holocaust where you just have an industrial extermination of an entire population. You can still have genocides where a significant number of population have been targeted and killed as part of a larger campaign to eradicate their presence from the land and depopulate an area. Recently, you saw an Iranian missile hit a hospital in Israel, and you saw a major outpouring of condemnation towards Iran for targeting a hospital. Now, the reason this is somewhat hypocritical is Israel's already targeted 36 hospitals in Gaza under the excuse that each of these are being used for a military purpose, even though this hasn't been corroborated by international agencies, whereas at the same time they complain over their hospital being targeted and trying to treat this as an exclusive war crime. The level of hypocrisy is staggering, but not surprising.
The revolution will be live.